Hey guys, welcome back to Trekyards. I am your singularly awesome captain, Captain
And,
Foley.
and I'm the one, the only Commander Cookins.
And we have a good one for you guys today.
That's right. As you can tell, we have a singular wit here on Trekyards.
Is that me?
Mm-hmm.
Are you talking about
Yep.
me?
Yep.
Have you singled me out, Samuel?
Of course not. No. That'd be silly. We're a team after all. And if I remove one of us...
Then there would be only one.
Yeah.
Because there can be only one.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Highlander reference there. Anyway, let's move on to today's topic of interest.
Yeah. Please, let's do that. In case you guys haven't noticed, we're referring to the number one a lot in this intro. And why is that, Stuart?
Because you're my number one.
Oh.
Right?
But no beard, unlike the other famous number one.
Yeah, well, anyway, I'm glad you asked, Samuel.
It was scripted, so I sort of had to.
Exactly. And that's because today we will be looking at the famous and probably one of the most famous side cannon ships in all of Star Trek lore. We are taking a look at the single nacelled Saladin Class destroyer design made famous by Franz Joseph in his Star Trek technical manual.
Yeah, this is indeed a fan favourite design and just fan infamous. I mean, it's just one of those ones that I think everyone knows about.
Yeah.
And as such, we felt compelled to look in full detail here for you today on Trekyards. Now, as you mentioned, this is really a side cannon ship, only appearing on screen as part of a background scrolling computer in Star Trek 2 and 3 and 2 of the movies, making it loosely canon. And as I said to you in the pre-read, it's kind of like it's blurry canon. It's on screen, but it's blurry.
It's hazy cannon.
Teeny, but you can see it.
It should also be noted that there have been a lot about this design written over the years from various sources, including Starfleet Battles, some FASA background information, fan-drawn blueprints, numerous games, and the aforementioned technical manual, only to name a few. So a lot of information presented herein is from various sources and includes speculation, and as such is not really official canonical information. So please bear that in mind as you watch.
So we're looking at non-canon information about a non-canon ship that sort of appeared as loosely...
It's loosely canon,
It's a licensed information about a licensed ship that's sort of canon, but also mostly not.
That thing, what you just said.
So without any further ado, all these terrible, terrible puns. Terrible puns. We bring you the Saladin Class destroyer.
I'm really disappointed you didn't read my last pun. I put singularly awful puns. Singularly awful puns.
I want to let the one and only Stuart Foley give the last single pun.
You got another one and only in there. Good job.
Because you are the one and only.
Anyway, moving right along. This ship measures in at 253.75 meters in length, width of 130.4 meters, and 58.3 meters in height. Again, as this information comes from various sources, the sizing does vary, sometimes substantially, from 242 meters to 261 meters in length. But for the purposes of this episode, and because I've seen it a few times in my research, we went with the number in the middle as a safe bet. It should also be noted that there are several subclasses and variants to this design, which can also justify the varying lengths and statistics. We will, of course, mention some of those variations in this episode as well.
The Saladin was referred to as a Class 1 destroyer, or Scout class vessel, and consisted of a saucer section and a single nacelle, each similar in exterior design to that of the Constitution class vessels of the 2260s. The idea of a single nacelle vessel was initially frowned upon as something that would never actually work practically. However, it soon proved extremely useful in a wide variety of fleet operations. This newly designed ship had an internal configuration that was actually significantly different from that of the Constitution class cruisers, with whom they actually shared basic design elements, with reactors, warp core, and other features of the engineering hull split between the saucer and actually in its single nacelle. And actually, this internal configuration allowed for a crew of 200 to 350 personnel.
The Saladin was designed as a smaller and less expensive stablemate to the very successful Constitution class cruisers, and utilizing many of the same components as the Constitution class. However, it proved much less successful as a multi-purpose workhorse. While it carried a cruiser's armament in most cases, it lacked the power grid of a full cruiser, making it slightly underpowered in some battle situations. While this ship lacked some maneuverability, its large saucer section made it capable of taking considerable punishment without losing warp power. Standard weapons for this initial class included 6 phaser 1s in 3 newly designed dual-mount ball turret-style banks, soon to become the new fleet-wide standard, as well as 2 standard photon torpedo launchers.
A guided missile version of the Saladin was also built and tested. These were inspired by encounters with the Kzinti, who relied heavily on drones and missiles. This new class, dubbed the DDG Saladin, was a testbed for new missile-based Federation technology, but they soon abandoned the experiment, however, because the missiles available at the time did not make up for the loss of the 2 photon torpedo bays that needed to be sacrificed for this conversion. The prototype did remain in service, however, using newly designed probes, which were easily launched from these new missile launch racks, as well as serving as a missile launching platform for the Federation's anti-missile and point defense training exercises.
These new single nacelle cruiser configurations use a doppelganger warp drive to maintain a stable warp field with only one nacelle. Despite only having a single nacelle to generate a warp field, the ship could easily attain speeds up to warp 8. This rather unorthodox design of having only a single warp nacelle would have been impossible just a few years earlier, when it was required to have a pair of warp nacelles acting in unison to create a stable warp field. This design, referred to as the off-axis warp engine design, would have introduced uncontrollable instabilities that previous warp field computers would not have been able to handle. However, now with the introduction of the newly developed Daystrom multitronic and duotronic units in the year 2243, the instabilities of the off-axis warp fields could be finely controlled, creating more versatile vessels as well as different designs, including the more advanced and recently commissioned top-secret 3-nacelled heavy dreadnought design called the Federation Class.
Enjoy there, Stuart. And it is worth mentioning there's a single nacelle, but it's got 2 sets of warp coils. That's how it works, right?
In some iterations, yes. Makes sense, but at the same time, I think this off-axis warp field geometry with the new computers creating a stability, I don't know. I don't think it necessarily has the 2 warp coils in the single nacelle, but that is also...
I just thought I'd bring it up because I was like, is that... Because I've heard that before, but it was out of the script. Interesting. But anyway, the Saladin was expected to carry out essentially the same research and exploratory missions as the heavy cruiser during peacetime. For this reason, at the same laboratory facilities as the Constitution-class cruisers, which were the most advanced science labs aboard any ships in the fleet, second only to the Daystrom Institution and, of course, Discovery. It was soon realised, though, that the class didn't really live up to the hype it received early on. Most proved underpowered in some instances, as it did lack speed and manoeuvrability, as well as occasionally suffering from some warp field instability issues. These were usually corrected quickly, but did prove to be a problem from time to time, a problem that simply didn't exist for the standard 2-nacelle ship configurations.
And I think this is where the double warp coil design comes into the single nacelle in this part, because this is where the nacelles get upgraded. So the initial idea behind the design was to have a very quick and easy ship to build based on the standard Federation components of the time. This did bolster the Federation's fleet substantially, but did not do very well in combat roles. They did, however, stand out in patrol and scientific roles. Later, however, the new Mark IV-B warp engines became available. These were the first major upgrades on the engines of the Constitution-class ships and replaced the older-style nacelles fleet-wide in the early 2260s. So it's replacing the cage-style ones with the solid-colored Bizarre collector and the little spike with the newer ones that we see in the production version. These provided nearly a doubling of both field densities and magnetomic energy tap-off flow. And since it's doubling, maybe that explains why there's two rows of warp coils maybe in the new ones.
Yeah, actually.
Once these new engines were mated to the class's space frames, the ship finally had the punch they needed to become capable and versatile fighting ships of the line.
With the addition of these new nacelle designs, some of the sensors and logistic pallets had to be replaced with additional warp and fusion reactors. Once these changes were in place and the additional power became available, the weapon systems were raised to a performance level comparable to some of the larger ships of the fleet. Warp field instability soon became a thing of the past, and the ship very quickly became a very valuable asset, becoming a formidable patrol, anti-piracy, and rapid deployment interdiction ship.
This upgraded version of the design outperformed the original specifications by a factor of 2. Maybe 2 sets of warp coils, who knows. While not able to pack quite the superior punch to its larger sister fleet ships, it could certainly now hang in a firefight long enough for reinforcements to arrive.
And I just want to jump in there. We mentioned earlier that it was almost close to a Constitution class, but if you think about it, that got refit as well. So it went from the cage tech to then definitive production tech, we call it. So maybe that was a bigger upgrade. I mean, if you consider they might have fully upgraded the warp core, then the power level, even though the Saladin doubled and was now almost there, because the relative jump, it still sort of stayed on par.
Yeah,
Everything
I
got
believe
upgraded.
so. I believe so. Yeah, absolutely. While the Saladin class starships can be viewed as somewhat of a successful compromise, due in large part to its continuous design and modification upgrade history, as they kind of scrambled from time to time to fix or improve the ship's many early design flaws. The fact is that over 300 of them were eventually constructed and commissioned into the various fleets over the 80-year period. There are many clean sheet designs that cannot even begin to claim that level of durability or longevity. Federation class. Just saying. And maybe even the Foley class. Only 3 or 4 ships built, it doesn't really...
Well,
I'll shut up now.
300, though, to the 12 Constitution classes. I mean, that tells you...
Well, the Constitution classes got bolstered a little bit. They added a few more. But, yeah, The original 12 were 12.
So I guess the secondary hull is the expensive bit.
Maybe.
Or they kind of mass-produced the nacelles. But I guess they were kind of the birds of prey of the equivalency. The Borels, 1 billion of them made, and lasted a long time.
Yeah.
Though the single warp engine design of the Saladin class was seen overall as an underperforming vessel, it was one of the first of Starfleet's vessels to incorporate the no secondary hull philosophy. Not since the NX era have so many Starfleet vessels incorporated this design philosophy. It led to vessels such as the Miranda class heavy destroyer with the 2 underslung warp nacelles, the North Carolina class with the 1 high-mounted and 1 low-mounted warp nacelle, and the Constellation class heavy frigate with dual upper and low-mounted warp nacelles, and there are even many more.
The Saladin class battle scouts were among the last ships of the line to go through the fleet modernization program of the late 2200s, which of course brought us the newly refitted Constitution class design. Of the 79 active vessels remaining of the class, only 44 of them underwent the modernization program, and 24 of them were lent or leased to Allied naval forces. The remaining ships all went into mothballs at the Antares orbital space docks, and remained there until they were decommissioned or scrapped for parts, or used in the scramble brought about by the Borg and Dominion conflicts in later years. The last of these refit-style Saladin-class ships were gone by 2348, nearly a century after first entering service.
Most of these refits took place at the Kennedy Orbital Shipyards, located in orbit of Earth. The new refit style, which incorporated newly advanced and downsized technologies, now allowed for an expanded crew of up to 500 personnel. They also had an additional 3 more ball-mounted phaser turrets at the lower saucer surface, bringing the total number of phaser emitters up from 6 to 12. Also incorporated into this design were the upgraded photon torpedo launchers installed in the dorsal segment of the design.
Now, as mentioned earlier, let's take a look at some of the variants in this design lineage. The most prevalent, of course, would be the Hermes class. The only real distinct difference between the Saladin and her sister class, the Hermes, were the armaments. While the Saladin class housed 3 phaser banks with 6 emitters in total and 2 photon torpedo launchers, the Hermes class Scout only had 1 bank consisting of 2 phaser emitters. It had additional sensors installed to be the electronic eye of the fleet, and it used these extremely long-range sensors and scanners to search much farther than other ships could.
The large number of special sensors made the ship particularly effective on scientific missions, though because of the reduced phaser suite and lack of photon torpedoes, these ships were kept back from enemy borders or unexplored space and focused mainly on internal Federation scientific studies. These vessels were eventually replaced by the heavily specialised Hermes-class science vessels for survey missions, and superseded on long-range mapping cruises by more modern sensor technologies installed on just newer standard starships.
Existing ships of the class were upgraded in 2271 to make use of new technologies and capabilities that were developed for the refitted Constitution class vessels. This greatly increased the performance longevity of the class, carrying them into the 2300s. The class was retired in the early part of the 24th century, but a handful of the vessels were upgraded once again to face the threats of the Dominion and Borg in 2373 in a very desperate move by the Federation to field numbers against the twin threats.
Several attempts were made to incorporate shuttle bays. Some added the shuttle bay as an extension on the upper BC deck by extending those aft and making for a very reliable shuttle bay addition. These could only allow for very few amounts of shuttles, however, usually being only 2 shuttlecraft and 1 shuttle pod. Other attempts were made to add shuttle bays to the area where the dorsal attached to the bottom of the saucer section. This allowed for a larger bay, but proved problematic, allowing power feeds from the warp nacelle assembly up into the saucer section. Some variants even incorporated shuttle elevators that allowed for an internal bay located within the saucer section itself. This, however, came at the cost of removing many of the labs and reactors that made the ship so useful, so it was not a widely attempted option.
Many other advancements in sensor and deflector technology could be seen incorporated into this design over the years. The original launch configuration of the design had a rotatable sensor and deflector combination dish located in place of the standard planetary sensor dome. These were extremely successful, but did limit the Bizarre collectors in their attempts to intake stellar matter. Other configurations were soon experimented with, again adding in the main deflector and sensor package to the nacelle mounting point at the base of the dorsal attachment. Later, with the advent of the new refit-style deflector arrays, a large portion of the lower saucer would often be carved out and the sensor installed there. This was an exceedingly popular and successful upgrade and would be installed in the vast majority of the refit-style Saladins. And just as a side note, I should take a quick minute here to point out that there were some other design iterations in Starfleet battles that were actually called the X ships, which incorporated new experimental technologies, including newly designed nacelles and other components. One of these designs was called the Two Moons class, which is ironic because there's only one nacelle, but it's called the Two Moons. But anyway, and this had a more shovel-shaped saucer section and sported the newly enhanced warp nacelle design, complete with blue Bizarre collectors.
And another noteworthy design style would be the single nacelle Larson class. This is more robust and extremely more maneuverable than the standard Scout class design, with double struts and sporting the nacelle up top. But anyways, we don't want to spoil any future episodes on ships like this. We're talking specifically about the Saladin Class today. So let's move on to behind the scenes.
The Saladin Class starship was a design originally created by Franz Joseph in his Starfleet Technical Manual, which lists the USS Saladin as the prototype of the class. The production staff of Star Trek II and Star Trek III used some of the ships in the Technical Manual as background display images looped on monitor screens throughout the bridge, technically making them loose canon at least.
This was intended merely as background decoration, but freeze frames and close examination have shown it likely, but not to be fair, conclusively, that the images were taken directly from the technical manual with little to no modifications. And this was later confirmed by Trekyards' regular special guest Rick Sternbach on a number of occasions and forums.
Another interesting fact about these style destroyers, or Scout class ships if you prefer, is the use of the 6-digit registry number as opposed to the 7 digits we see in the larger ships of the time, like the Constitution class heavy cruisers. For example, the USS Saladin herself had the registry number of NCC 500.
The Saladin class is one of the most recognisable ships found in the Starfleet Universe series of games, which of course includes Starfleet Battles, and is one of a handful of designs which cross over from the official Star Trek literature into the Starfleet Universe lore by means of a licensing agreement with Franz Joseph and Ballantine Books. This agreement also ensured that the design appeared a number of times in side canon stories, novels, as well as comics and all of that, as well as its inclusion in the background of Star Trek 2 and 3. All this together has kind of cemented its position in the loose Star Trek canon, making it a fan favourite design.
Yeah, and I like to think of it as part of the unseen TOS fleet, which would include like the Ptolemy class tug, as well as the Federation class dreadnought and things like that. So Franz Joseph's work should really not be overlooked, in my opinion. I think it was a great contribution, and it's that unseen fleet we keep hearing about in TOS but never see.
And then we see the prequel ships in Discovery that do take some lots of different variants. I will say, I think out of all the Franz Joseph and the alternates, I mean the idea of the Saladin, I mean it's the simplest kit bash you could possibly do. It really is, but it's the one that simplicity works.
Yeah, and it does go against the pairs rule, but I love how they incorporate the off-axis design and the new computers that can handle the subspace field creation, warp field stability thing is fantastic. And then upgrading to the newer style nacelles, which could in fact have this dual rows of warp coils, which kind of make it like a pairs. Because it says once they did that, the instability problems kind of went away. So that would make perfect sense. To kind of incorporate the pairs rule but into a single nacelle. I think that's a good idea.
Although for me the pairs rule, it's the future, and as dinosaurs do, tech finds a way. If you want to create a single nacelle ship, you can probably find a way to create a bubble just with one nacelle.
And you got to think too, maybe the new style nacelles with the Constitution class even, they found out that if one of the nacelles was damaged, the ship couldn't go to warp. It didn't have the stability to actually do that. Introducing the new nacelles that could have the dual warp coils in each could actually eliminate that fact. You get one nacelle completely damaged, you can still go to low warp at least with the other one.
That's really interesting.
It's a possibility anyway that I like to. We can always retrofit things in and retcon things, so I like that.
But yeah, guys, that is the Saladin, a very classic. I think we've been asked for this since we did the Dreadnought. I mean, it's the other famous Franz Joseph design. But I learned a lot.
Yeah, we need to redo the Dreadnought. It's awful.
It's one of our better early ones, but it was one of our early ones in early.
We'll be redoing it at some point.
Yeah. So, guys, hope you enjoyed this episode of Trekyards. Lots to learn, lots to see, and here is the canon picture of the Saladin in the universe. All the pixels of it that existed right there. Wow. And if you want to support this show, you can obviously share it around anywhere you think fans of just good TOS Trek would enjoy, because that does help us get more attention and get more people tuned into the show every single week.
That's right. And don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, check out the Facebook page. We've always lots of great stuff there. I had lots of fun researching this one. I love these ships. Grew up with Starfleet battles, so I love talking about it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it as well. Put your comments below. What do you think about this ship? And we look forward to reading those. So until next time, guys, when there will still be two of us. I don't think there will be just one of us. It's the pairs rule. It's the pairs rule fully enforced here on Trekyards. Team Trekyards. Yes. Until next time, guys, I'm Captain Foley.
And I am Commander Kings. Bye, guys.
Bye.